Hey everybody, as you can tell here, what I want to do real quick is just backtrack a little bit and talk about the information that you all have been going through throughout the week with this first empires chart. I know we discussed this one yesterday pretty much all together, but the other three I wanted to just backtrack a little bit and make sure that everybody has some of the basic similar information, but not all exactly the same. And at the end here, I'm going to skip ahead real quick. At the end here, we're going to wrap up at least this discussion as well. I have a timeline that kind of sets out when all this stuff had been taking place, which is super helpful. I have a map of where, which is going to be super helpful. I know we've looked at maps before, but then the why, I'm not going to go through these like individually and talk about all of them, but obviously this is all of the why we even study the Mesopotamians in the first place. Okay, so let's get back to the chart here, and I might be referencing some of these pages in between. But I'm going to start with the Akkadians, or I put the name Sargon here. So for the who, obviously the king Sargon is the person. So obviously this was the reading that went with it. So the who specifically is talking about this guy, Sargon, who's the leader of these Akkadians. It also talks about Sargon over here. So anything you put for that related to Sargon or the fact that he was the king or anything like that is fair game. The second question here says where, like where was Sargon, where was his kingdom, or where was the kingdom of Acadia? And if you notice, it says right here, the kingdom of Akkad developed in northern Mesopotamia. I think that's the easiest answer that we could probably have for that one, northern Mesopotamia. Because obviously, you put Mesopotamia for all of these wheres, that's really not going to fly. Because duh, they're all Mesopotamia. Okay, when specifically? Well, we've got a couple answers here. I do, if I skip ahead, I have this timeline. And in this timeline, it looks like it's around, let's say, 2400, because again, you're counting backwards, about 2400, almost to, it goes all the way over here. If 2000 is this dot right here, about 1900 ish BC. But I know from what the book discussed for this win, anywhere between the year 2400 or 2100 BC is in the ballpark. Okay, so roughly about 2400 BC to 2100 BC, somewhere in that realm. Okay, the two important facts. That's totally up to you all because obviously this was the information. Whatever you found to be two important facts, either about Sargon or about the Akkadians or their language or their gods or anything like that, that's up to you. Okay, so I have no problems with that. All right, let's go with this grouping here. This was kind of a tricky one because you have Hammurabi, who is a person, you have Babylon, which is a place, and you have the Hammurabi Code, which is like a thing, it's a set of laws. So let's actually look at this one. The who, if you just put Hammurabi, well, again, that's not going to fly, but you have a pretty easy answer for this one because right here it says, who was Hammurabi? And about the third line down, it says that he was the Babylonian king. Sorry, about the fifth or sixth line down. It says he was the Babylonian king. So Babylon is a city, and he's the king of it. Okay, so for that one, for your who, Babylonian king or king of Babylon is pretty straightforward. Now your where. Okay, your where for this one is a lot of different answers. There's a lot actually. Okay. So at the very first line here it says west of Mesopotamia. So maybe you caught on to that one, like west of Mesopotamia. Maybe you caught on to this one that says it was on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River. Or you even caught on to this one where it says it's now in present day Iraq. Okay. So there's a lot of different things. And it also goes down here and talks about how they control the north and the south. And then it talks about all these things with west. So if you looked at this thing, you could have said north, south, east, or west, honestly, if you weren't paying attention. But I think the western region of Mesopotamia or the eastern part of the Euphrates River or modern day, like current day Iraq, that's all part of kind of the where for Babylon. So that's kind of a tricky one right here. The when, you have basically two options. Okay, it does say right here the 1800s BC. So if you're up 1800s BC, that's fine. Then it also gets specific about Hammurabi and it says 1792 BC. So that's fine. If you put 1800s to 1792, or if you started with one or the other, that's fine. Okay, that's pretty specific. Okay, now while I'm here, the other part of your chart for this section was to write me 2 facts about Hammurabi's code. That is totally up to you all. Obviously, any 2 facts from here is going to be fair game. I will tell you that on Monday we're going to do a pretty detailed deep dive on Hammurabi's code. Okay, Hammurabi's code was actually a set of laws, and they were pretty strict. Okay, but they're pretty strict for a reason. We're going to get into that on Monday in great detail. We actually have a thing we're going to do with Hammurabi's code that's pretty detailed. But just so you know, again, the guy Hammurabi, who was the king of Babylon, established this set of laws. And he set the laws, obviously, because he wanted to deal with all these different crimes that had been happening and people breaking the law. So he really wanted to make a strict set of rules. So we're going to deal with that again in more detail on Monday. So that knocks this group out, and that knocks this group out. And the Assyrians, again, not too much going on here. There are a couple of options for the win, so I'll skip ahead here for those guys. It does say the Assyrian Empire arose about 1,000 years after Hammurabi. So if you literally put that 1,000 years after Hammurabi, that's fine. If you did the math and you subtracted like whatever year, be careful though, because it's BC, so you're kind of counting backwards or subtracting instead of really adding 1,000 years. But there's also this specific year of 900 BC that's mentioned. So again, anything with that is fine. 1,000 years after Hammurabi, or if you actually did the math, or if you put 900 BC, that all is fine with me. Okay, now for this box where it says where, 4 present-day countries, I actually gave you a clue. The 4 present-day countries are listed right here. So the Assyrian Empire would have been around modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. Okay, so those 4 are specifically mentioned right there. And while I'm here again for the key facts, you have the entire army paragraphs right here. I said you need to give me one good fact about the Assyrian army and then one good fact about the kings and or the government. You don't have to write me one about kings and one about government. I just meant from the same area. Okay, so that's the rest of that chart. And as we already mentioned, we talked about how the Chaldeans, they are their own group, but technically they're the ancestors of this group over here, the Babylonians, right? Hammurabi's ancestors. So they are a new group, but a lot of times they're referred to as the new Babylonian Empire because basically what they did is they just kicked out the Assyrians from what they thought was originally theirs way over here. Okay. So to wrap this up, here's what I did. I put together this timeline. I brought a map up and I just put a list here. So here's the situation. Basically, on this timeline, you have the groups that we've been talking about throughout this unit, especially the last couple of days, spaced out on a timeline by different colors. And of course, you're counting backwards here. So the year 0 would be like over here where my mouse is because we're counting up to the year 0. But you have the Sumerians, which we talked about at the very beginning, right? The Sumerian math and Sumerian writing. But Sumer was a good long stretch of time here, from about 3,500 BC to about 2,300 BC right here. That's a long stretch. And then all these last 4 we've talked about, you can see go a little bit quicker, but still big chunks of time. So you have the Akkadian Empire, so like Sargon, that is all this chunk. And then you have Hammurabi's time period, so the Babylonian Empire is right around here. And then you have the Assyrians, which we talked about before, not a lot of people liked, right? So they had a lot of enemies. And then you have the Chaldean people, who again are kind of the ancestors of the Babylonian Empire. So they're kind of the new Babylonian Empire right there. Okay, so where is all this stuff basically happening? Well, we said that Mesopotamia is translated to mean middle or between 2 rivers. Okay, like Meso means middle in Greek, so Meso or in between, and Potomos is a river, so it's basically translated as between the rivers. So we see the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers that are labeled here, and we know these civilizations started in between the 2 rivers because that was good, fertile farmland, and that's how a lot of these civilizations kind of built up in the first place. Now, as you can see, this is all of Mesopotamia through all of this time frame. So this green, especially, like at any one time, one of those empires could have stretched a little farther or been a little smaller, depending on when you look at the timeline. But where it's happening, obviously, is kind of that crossroads between Africa. So Africa's over here, and you have what we call today the Middle East right here. You have Asia, which is going to be over in this corner, and you have Europe over in this corner. So where it's happening is obviously between all these places. So like the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Europe. So it's kind of right there in the middle. The Mediterranean is here, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, Caspian Sea, the Black Sea. So all these different bodies of water are also surrounding it. So that's going to be important for a lot of different reasons. Okay, the why, real quick, like I said, we're not going to talk about these in detail, but why we talk about Mesopotamia in the first place is because they started a lot of these things happening for human civilization. Okay, they didn't start agriculture. We know that Neolithic people did that, but we said that agriculture, especially irrigation, right? Like building things to help you get water to different crops. That's happening right here, right in between the two rivers. So that agriculture or that farming is like the mainstay of this whole time period. Different forms of technology. Obviously, we've talked about different things again, like mathematics, um, writing. That's going to go with the literature here, but all kinds of things that go with this or they start this. The literature, there's a couple of things, right? There's examples of things that they wrote, and there's also examples of ways that they wrote, especially when we wrote you all's name in Sumerian. That's a good example of how these early forms of language are going to pop up. Legal codes. This goes hand in hand with Hammurabi's code. So obviously, in this area during this time period, there's going to be groups that are going to start setting up laws. Okay, we know that cave people didn't really have laws, so Paleolithic people didn't have laws. Neolithic people didn't necessarily invent laws. When you get to the Mesopotamians, they're going to start putting down some tracks on this. Things like philosophy and religion and architecture, just real quick to wrap those up. Obviously, these deal with thinking. These deal with obviously religion. We're going even further. Obviously, we're establishing religions, or people are starting to believe more in religions or follow gods, goddesses, whatever. Whereas again, we know that Paleolithic people probably didn't. Neolithic people might have just a tad. Okay, in architecture, obviously, we talked about with the ziggurats. There's pretty complex architecture going on with these people, right? We're no longer living in caves or temporary shelters. We're also not even living just in like farming villages like the Neolithic people. We're really getting into what we can call modern day cities, right? Large groups of people creating large buildings and large walls for protection from enemies and very advanced things. Okay. So here's the deal with today. There is no official assignment that you all have to give me. Okay. I know you've been kind of stringing together these days this week by adding a little bit at a piece. But now that we've gone back through it today, especially if I go back here, if you have made sure, and I know everybody submitted this to me yesterday, but now if you've gone back and made any changes, that's fine, right? I trust you. I would make sure obviously that the stuff is correct, obviously, but you do not have to resubmit me this chart, even if you made one change. You definitely don't have to submit any of this, right? If you wanted to add the timeline to your notebook, right, you could do that, but you don't have to share that with me. The map is clearly just a map, so you don't need to copy a whole map. The why, again, I'm not going to ask you all about these specifically, but I just wanted to bring it up for our conversation today, really. Okay, so again, there is no official assignment that you all have to post. Another reason for that is we're going to have a lot to do on Monday. We're going to have a lot to do with the Hammurabi Code activity. So I just want to kind of wait until then to get that started. All right. So again, as always, I hope y'all are doing well out there and happy Friday. And I'm going to let you go and see you guys on Monday. All right. See ya.